Hello, hello. Welcome to episode 31 of Valley of the Sun Sunday Scaries. I'm your host, as always, Sean Nickel, coming to you from Phoenix, Arizona for the first time in about 60 days. We appear to have some rain clouds. That doesn't always mean that we're going to get some rain, but I'm feeling very tropical today. I decided to put on my tropical outfit and knock out episode 31. On today's podcast, we have Tim Heuer, who we always joke around at work is the most interesting man on the earth, just like the Dos Equis guy. He has done and gone and lived virtually everywhere, and he's one of my favorite people to talk to because he's a very genuine person, and he's been one of my biggest supporters from the beginning. And so when I asked him to come on, I wanted to make sure that he contributed the fact that he's kind of already gone through his quarter life crisis and he's on the other side of that, and I wanted him to explain, what happened during his quarter life crisis and just some advice for people, to get through theirs as well, and to just show you that, you're going to be okay, you're going to come out on the other side, and you're going to look just fine. And in Tim's life right now, he's definitely thriving. He's not just, doing fine. But without further ado, I'm going to bring on Tim Heuer, and he's going to tell us a story. All right, welcome back. We are on episode 31. It's a crazy amount of episodes. I have my good friend Tim Heuer on the podcast. Tim and I met back in Michigan, and you are currently out near Seattle right now, correct?
Yeah, I live on Vashon Island, just off the coast of Seattle. You got it.
All right, cool. Well, I'm excited to have you on. I'm going to kick things off by just kind of letting you speak in the beginning here. I know that we always joked around with you back at work that you were basically like the Dos Equis guy, where you're the most interesting man on the planet. You have a story for everything, but it's in a super genuine way and not a try to one-up you kind of way. So we'll try and limit your stories because we only have a certain amount of time. But I'm going to kick it over to you and just kind of talk about your life path after, where you grew up and how you've wound up back in Seattle. I'll kind of turn it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I appreciate you having me on. It's awesome getting to know some of the guests you've had, and I've actually learned a ton. It's been cool. And just to see your progression and what you're learning through all this, it's cool to share that journey with you. But yeah, man, so I grew up in Detroit. My parents are from Detroit. Pretty early on, I think kindergarten, we moved out to the Bay Area, California, which is where I was until high school. We moved back to Michigan. And then I spent a couple of tours of duty at MSU, go green, a couple of different degrees in there. So I spent a lot of time in East Lansing, and yeah, kind of along the way, just exploring different passions in life. I spent a good chunk of my early 20s, late teens in school. And every summer I was out of there like a bat out of hell. Just where can I go next? What can I, what have I learned this year, and how can I apply it? And what's the next adventure? So that was a good chunk of, of my 20s, my early 20s, is just kind of planning the next adventure for the summertime, basically, and then towards the end of my time there, I found my passion, which was organic farming, and spent a good chunk of the next 8 years pursuing that in New York, out in California, back to Detroit. And then I think that's when you and I hooked up. And
how does one stumble upon their passion being organic farming? I just don't know how that comes up in everyday conversation or everyday life.
It's funny. So, this may sound cliche, but I literally saw a poster in a building at school. So I was there, my second degree there was in landscape architecture, and I was struggling to find an elective. I needed to find a 1-credit elective for whatever reason, just to fill out the schedule. And there's 1-credit classes are weird. There's a bunch of weird ones. And I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I was walking down the hall, and then there was this poster with all the little pull tags with the phone number, whatever, email address, whatever on the bottom. And it said in big bold letters, it said, "Do you know where your food comes from?" And it's honestly a question that I had never thought of before. My mom had some gardens growing up, but for the most part, she shopped at Kroger, and, dinner showed up, and I never thought about where
dinner showed up. I love that.
It just showed up, and it was one of those things that it just hit me so hard. You have those moments in your life where something just hits you really hard, and you're excited and curious, and you want to lean into it. And it was an advertisement for a class that was situated at the Student Organic Farm at Michigan State. And so I think every Tuesday and Friday I went out there and just worked at the farm for that semester. And it's one of those things where every time I went out, I just dove deeper, became more curious, and just wanted to be there with all my free time. And so by the time I graduated 3 years later, I had been spending all my time there. I was an employee there for 2 years, a farm worker, and I sort of pushed the landscape architecture degree that I had earned to the side and said, I just want to figure out how to be in agriculture, how to be farming.
I feel like almost everybody ends their story with college going, I pushed my degree to the side and then I did this.
Yeah,
I just feel like
exactly.
that's become the new norm when it comes to college. But I
It's
always
true.
tell people nowadays, like, college is amazing just for the experience, not necessarily for like your career or your future, if that makes sense. Because I just, unless you're like a doctor or a lawyer, I just don't know a lot of people that end up going into like their actual field. Maybe an engineer. My brother's an engineer, so maybe that's true. But I mean, like, I don't know. It's kind of funny how that works. But
I think there's a couple things. Like the biggest thing is obviously like, socialization and just all of the diversity of experiences and people that you meet there, but also just like fostering a love for learning and for curiosity. And that's a good place to do it. You're out of your element for the most part, you're meeting new people. And if you can foster that environment where you're always creative, curiosity, you're always curious and you're always wanting to learn, I think that's a big chunk of what people come out of there with. When I started at MSU, 17 years old, I was a little bit young for my grade. I went into like the pre-med, program there. It's just something that I thought I wanted to do. I didn't have that much thought into it. And I did really badly and I didn't like it at all. And so I actually, I dropped out that next year. I didn't go back to school and I just went on an adventure. And my parents said, hey, if you want to go back to school, that's up to you, but find something that you're passionate about and you'll pay for it.
yeah,
You're paying your own way or whatever. And in that year, I met some amazing people and found some incredible mentors that I'm still in touch with today. But also, it became clear to me that I did want to go back to school and I wanted to focus on things that I was interested in. And so I actually, to your point, I enrolled in a specialized program that was basically design your own degree. And I got a degree that was like one part religion, one part philosophy, one part creative writing, and one part art history. And I just threw it all together. And luckily they called it a degree, but
and I will circle back around because one of the biggest things that I'm passionate about, believe it or not, is like food and all of that stuff. So we'll table that towards the end.
yeah.
But you've been around since the beginning of the podcast. You've been a follower. You've been, talking to me on side messages. I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are. You know that it's all about the quarter life crisis, the point of life that I'm in. And you've known me for 4-ish years now. So you saw me before it happened, during, and after, so if we want to call this after, I think it's still during. But I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the quarter life crisis, how you would define it, and, talk about maybe a point in your life when you were going through that yourself.
Yeah, man. So the first thing that comes to mind is actually a quote. I'm big on quotes and poetry. And when I first saw that you were doing this, the thing that immediately came to mind was this quote by Mary Oliver, the poet. And she has a line in one of her poems, and she says, "What do you want to do with your one wild and precious life?" That's it, actually. It's not even a quote. That's the entire poem. And
Oh, wow. That
that's,
needs to be like on like a sign in my house. I think that's
yeah.
incredible.
Well, that's why I thought of you. Because it's when I saw the first, the idea of the podcast, I was like, that sort of goes to the heart of what you're trying to do. I feel like it's a question that a lot of people are really challenged by and really struggle with at a certain point, mostly in your 20s, when you've gone through sort of a set of things that people wanted you to go through, and now it's sort of up to you, right? And so that's the first thing that comes to mind. And then the second thing that comes to mind is just about managing expectations. I think there's so many expectations thrust upon many of us when you're young and then when you're going through school. When the quarter life crisis hits, I feel like it's a time where people are really challenged by setting those aside, expectations from others, and trying to figure out what it is that's going to fulfill you, and just trying to figure out from there, like, what are the curiosities that I want to lean into? What are things that give me joy? What's really going to fulfill me? And try to keep that other baggage of other people's expectations to the side. And I think that goes to really the heart of the struggle, which is like, what do I want to do, as apart from what do other people want me to be doing, So that's something that I've noticed, especially with a lot of your guests, is just that, it seems to be a common theme where, that the reason people are struggling with the crisis is because they either had in their mind that they wanted to be doing something else, or somebody told them you should be doing something else. And somehow it's put some roadblocks in place to prevent, the fulfillment of, one's own desires or one's own journey, even if it means a totally different path than either you thought you were going on or people around you thought you might.
For someone like you that's always followed their passion, is that something that was instilled in you from your parents? Is that something you learned on your own? Like, how do people get the courage to be able to do that? Because if they can just keep doing what they're doing now, in 20, 30 years, maybe they'll do something different, but this is safe, this is comfortable. But that was never you, and it probably still isn't you to this day. And I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, leaning in courageously, is something that Sam, my wife, and I, we talk about a lot. And the specific moment was after that freshman year in college. I realized I didn't want to be there. I wasn't passionate about it, and I just wasn't learning anything. And I booked a one-way flight to Alaska to be a dishwasher at like a fishing lodge. I didn't even know what I was doing. I was just like, let me figure where is the farthest place I can go and have an adventure and figure out what I want to do next. And it was on that journey that I met all of these people that are probably going through a quarter life crisis at the time. They were like 5 to 10 years older than me, and they're in their 20s and some in their early 30s. And they were all amazing, and they had these amazing stories of adventure and fulfillment and passion. And they became like real sort of guides for me for the next few years of my life as I figured out what I wanted to be doing. Because they all seemed so happy, but their paths were very unconventional. They had a hodgepodge of jobs. Nobody necessarily had a career. Some of them had gone to school, some of them had not. But they all seemed so happy to be doing what they were doing, and so that became sort of like a mantra for me for the next, throughout my 20s. Basically, it was like, I'm not necessarily interested in a career or something long term, but I'm going to find what makes me happy, and I'm going to do it for a while until it's not fulfilling me anymore. And that was really like, the bulk of the last, my entire 20s was what makes me happy, and I'm going to do that for a while until that's not making me happy anymore. And while that may not have a lot of like, it sounds scary to say, I guess, but at the time it just felt like there's no way I could be doing anything else, because I just feel like, I think I felt at the time like trying anything else would just be fake or phony. And it wasn't me, I had to just follow whatever curiosity I had and see where it went.
I think it's super important for everyone that's watching, though, to understand that you did follow your passions. You did what made you happy. You were curious. You traveled. I know we have, like I said before, I would jokingly, you have hundreds of stories of where you've gone, but you came out just fine, right? And I think when you look at people that may have gone into careers that they necessarily weren't passionate about, 5, 10 years down the road for them, they were then trying to go do what you were doing. But at that point, you have a family maybe, and, you're restricted to, the decisions that you can make, and I mean, with where you're at now, biasly, I know you have a very good job, that's able to let you provide for your family. You're able to move across the country, a beautiful home. You're like in the place of the world you always wanted to be.
Right.
But you got there by taking a lot of chances and doing the unconventional path. And so, like, when we talk about all this, I think it's really important for people to understand, like, you're going to be okay. Like, yeah, you might not be rich at 22, but who's to argue what rich really means? Is rich money, or is rich like experience? And that's something for me that over these last probably year or two.
Well, I think, one thing is that, first of all, following your heart is never going to steer you wrong. Just follow your heart and you're going to be okay. So I think that's important to recognize and to understand. And it's a good starting point for thinking about what you might want to be doing with your life. But beyond that, I think, you and I talk to a lot of people for work. And when I talk to folks that are like older than me, they maybe in their 60s, retired, whatever, they don't usually mention how proud they are that they started their 401k when they were in their 20s. What you hear about is their favorite adventure they went on with a buddy, or where they met their wife or spouse, their experience in the military, like those are the things you hear about, which is experience based, right? You and I have talked about this for a long time, like wealth, the phrase wealth of experience, like there's a reason why that's a phrase. I want to make sure that I don't look back, when I'm 65 and my knees hurt from all the hiking, and I can't do it anymore. I want to make sure I look back and then say, man, I wish I could have, or coulda, shoulda, woulda.
Well, you want to be 65 and have your knees hurt from hiking versus having your knees hurt from sitting in a job for, you know what I mean? Like it's all going to hit you the same way, essentially. So you might as well enjoy your years versus looking back going, I'm still in pain. I still can't walk. I wish I would have done something, though, because everyone I think has this idea in their mind that, when I retire, that's when I'll be able to go do all of this stuff. And I used to think the same way. I'm like, oh, when I retire, like I used to always say to people, like my goal is to retire early or to retire, period. But the more I thought about that, like, okay, let's say I retire at 40 or 50, my body's still going to be in a spot where it's not going to be what it is right now. And I think with too many people, they keep pushing it off, the adventure, thinking when I'm done working, I'll have all this money and I'll be able to go. But I mean, there's a phrase that's like, you're like time rich, money poor in the beginning, but then you're money rich, time poor towards the end. So you have all this money, but you can't really use it towards the end of your life, which is kind of weird. So if anyone's out there, like, do the adventure now. Don't wait till you're 60 something to do it.
That's the thing, man. That's the thing. And there's another phrase. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but youth is wasted on the young.
Oh, that one's been passed down for you. I never understood it till recently, but I completely understand it now.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, the thing is, and just like circling back with the quarter life crisis, like there's millions of ways to live, and only you know which is the best path for you, And so I think it just goes back to the heart of like trying to set your own expectations for what your life is going to be, instead of listening to what the expectations have been for your life from others, friends, family, partners, whoever. And just trying to set those expectations anew in your 20s and try to figure out what is my best path forward right now. And it doesn't have to last forever. That's the other thing. I was actually talking to a client of mine, who has had similar experiences, multiple different careers, lots of success in different things. And she was saying the question of what do you want to be when you grow up, to little kids, is so offensive to her, because it assumes that it's only one thing. And for many people like herself, like me, like you, I think, can be many different things in this life, and you can be many different things at the same time. You could be a doctor and an artist. You can be a banker and a farmer. You can be all these different things. And that question to children should maybe be rephrased a little bit.
Yeah.
To what kinds of things would you like to be doing when you're?
Yeah. What do you love? What are you passionate about? Like, that's so good. Like, I've never thought about that. And to say that the question offends you is it's like super good. Like it's like a good thing to say, because I think that we do from an early age put like kids in a bind. Like, what is the one thing you're going to do? And I'm coming into a little bit late, but like there are 4 or 5 things that I like to do. And I'm realizing now that 10 years ago, had I just focused on those 3 or 4 things and made those my careers, and, and just, it would have been a struggle, but the long term is you're only doing the things that you're passionate about for the rest of your life. And I'm not saying I'm too late to start that, because I'm doing that stuff now. But it is so crazy to think that you should be allowed to wear a lot of different hats throughout your life. But right now it's like, all right, little Timmy, what do you want to be? Baseball player. That's it. Here's your hat. Like go out there. Like, good luck.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, I think that, it was really valuable when she told me that. It's something that I've been thinking about as just a kind of a constant struggle in the back of my mind, especially during the quarter life crisis times, but even still today, like people want to put other people in a box. And that can be challenging for people who are passionate about multiple things. And, it's okay to have a job that pays the bills and gives you healthcare while at the same time pursuing something else on the side, or having a passion that takes up all of your other free time. Like, that's okay.
So we talk about, you kind of experienced that point of your life, like you've gone through the quarter life crisis yourself, you've had to sit back and evaluate and figure things out. But as we talked about a few days ago, you came out the other side. You made it. Here you are. You have 3, I believe, lovely children. I didn't know if you pushed out a 4th when I wasn't paying attention.
No,
but so you have 3 wonderful children, amazing wife, love Sam. You made the move out. What are some things when you reflect on that period of your life that you are like proud of yourself for doing, and what are some things maybe that you wish you would have given yourself some advice, and then we can kind of share that advice with everybody?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, in terms of pride, like I remember telling myself when I was 20, I want to make sure that I have as few regrets as possible about the next couple of years. And I had some mentors, again, that experience in Alaska when I was hanging out with people much older than me. I think that, many of them gave me that advice, and and it was from friends. So I took it to heart. And so just trying, I guess what that meant for me was, leaning into passion courageously, without fear in general, and also like without a specific outcome in mind. That was one of the hardest pieces in talking with my parents or friends who didn't really understand. I would tell them, okay, this is what I'm doing now, or this is what I'm doing next. And a lot of people want to know, like, what's the outcome? Like, what's the end goal? And for me, I either didn't know the answer to that, or I didn't have one because I didn't want to have one. I just wanted to do this, and like, I think looking back, I think that's hard to do, and I was able to do it on some level. And I think that, I'm proud of that. In terms of things that I wish I knew or could change, one of the things, I was talking about this with Sam because I told her I was coming on the show, and so we were chatting about it a little bit. And I guess one of the things is just speaking to elders, and you've always been an inspiration in terms of, your relationship with your grandma. And, one of the things that we do, elders like grandparents, for example, or other elders in our lives, like they're really good at listening and they're really good at asking questions, but I don't think that we ask them enough questions. And, when I was chatting with Sam, she was like, I think that's one thing that I would change. And I certainly agree with that. Like, that's one thing that I could have been better at during that time, because there's so much wisdom that comes with age, and it's easy to chat with elders and to answer all the questions they have about your life, but to ask questions is a different thing. The other thing is like starting a campaign of noticing. I guess you would describe it as maybe like paying attention without judgment. I wish I did more of that today, and I specifically wish I did more of that when I was younger, maybe going through a quarter life crisis. Walking down the street and just noticing things without making a judgment call on them, spending a few minutes doing that just in your own home, like during a meditation practice or something. I think that like really valuable insights can come from that, just noticing things without judgment. And I think you can sort of set a baseline for curiosity and learning through a practice of noticing. I think one of the other things is probably just starting a savings account. Like all of those adventures and all of the curiosities that I explored throughout my 20s. I didn't start a 401k until I was well into my 30s, and like that's okay with me. I'm cool with it, But I think just in general for anybody who's young, even if it's $5 a month, I think it's valuable to start thinking about it on some level and putting something aside, as little as it may be. I think it can kind of just get the wheels spinning for what's possible in the future. And I know a lot of your listeners are like, they've been doing that for a long time. But for me, I wish I kind of would have just, started thinking about money before I ended up thinking about it, which was way later in life. But I don't say that with regret. It's just something that if I could tell my 23-year-old self, to start a savings account, I probably would.
Well, I will wrap this up with our final question. One of the coolest things that we have had a lot of one-on-one conversations in our time together. But one of the coolest things that you ever instilled in me actually is the view of your health and how you and your wife, Sam, approach health. And just if you could give basically just a generic overview of how you guys approach health.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, I guess a few things that come to mind. So we were farming together. We were organic vegetable farmers in the Hudson Valley in New York for many years together, before we moved out here. And, one of the things that instilled on us was not only an appreciation for physical work, which I yearn for to this day because, my job is largely in front of the computer now, and I have a lot of flexibility to walk around and stretch while I'm working, but it's not the same as working outside, which Sam still does. She's still a farmer. But I think, when we were in that life, growing food for people, a few things became really important to us. Number one, anything that we put into our body was super important, and we were so resource rich at that point. We were growing all of our own vegetables, and most of the stuff we put into our bodies, we either grew ourselves or we traded with friends.
Or you knew the person that grew it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. We would trade for meat, for fish, for cheese, bread, whatever. And so it was sort of like the apex or the pinnacle of our health,
Right.
because everything we were putting in our bodies, we knew the producer personally, and that felt really good. And when we got away from that life, I used to bump into you and Christine at the farmers markets and in Royal Oak and all that. And so we still feel very passionate about supporting local food systems. And my wife is still a farmer. So I was looking at our budget one year, and there were all the different categories, rents, utilities, food, healthcare, vehicles. And I started filling it out like, okay, here's our budget for the year. And I started getting confused. I was like, wait, why is food over here? Because it seems to me like all of the nourishment that you get is either from air, food, or water, right? And so food is going to be like 90+% of what creates health for us. So shouldn't it be like sort of a subcategory under healthcare in your family budget? And when I made that shift, so I did it and I put it under there, and all of a sudden healthcare was like one of our biggest budget items for our family because food is a huge expense for most people. But when I did that, it was as simple as like changing it around on an Excel sheet. But this big shift happened in my mind of like, okay, healthcare is not like prescription co-pays and what you spend at Walgreens or a hospital visit. Healthcare is, how do I maintain my health so I can live a fulfilled life? And I think food is a huge portion of that, which is why we made the shift to put it under healthcare in our family budget. And it's still there to this day. And I think it's really important to recognize that a lot of how you feel is going to come from the nourishment that you're provided through food. And so making, not everybody has access to the same resources or the same choices that you and I do for food, but just recognizing that to the greatest extent that you can, you should be spending a lot of time thinking about what you're putting into your body and making healthy choices around that.
Yeah, and ever since you told me that, that completely changed my view on it as well. I spend probably more money on groceries than most people do. Now, the reason for that is because I eat out way less than most people. I can guarantee that, especially since moving out here quarantine. Best thing ever happened to my health was we just stopped going out, and so we make all of our own meals. But I'm perfectly okay with that. I will choose to spend a little bit more because it's crazy to think that we budget shop for all aspects of our life, right? Like we got to get this fridge for just a little bit cheaper. We have to get this mortgage for a little bit cheaper. And then we do that stuff. And then we also do it with food. And I think it's so wild. And then you don't even think about where did this food come from? How was it raised? Like how, and we don't think about it, but so now in my mind, like the biggest expense that I want every single month or every single day is what I'm putting in my body. Like that's changed my whole, like I don't need watches or suits. Like the most expensive thing I should be spending money on is my body. So when you gave me that shift, it's been one of the more powerful things. I definitely look forward to having you on down the road because there are many more topics for us to discuss and to dive into. But we thank you for taking the time to hang out with us for a little bit here. And if anybody wants to I know I usually ask my guests, hey, where can we engage with you? But I do know that you actively try to stay off of social media. So I will keep that part out of here. But
yeah, keep it out of here for now. But I definitely enjoyed it. I'm taking a little break for the most part, except for yours.
All right, that's what you need to tell the podcast host. I appreciate that.
It's been awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming on. We appreciate you, and we learned a lot.
Thanks, man.
So thank you again, Tim, for coming on. I know that in the near future, we can definitely do an entire podcast just around health and food in general. It's funny because I edit these shows and there's probably 35 more minutes of me and Tim talking about health, but I couldn't put out a hour and a half podcast for everybody. So when the time comes, we'll definitely have him on. We'll talk health because that's something that I am very passionate about. 2020 has been a big year for me in that arena. As always, stay healthy, stay distanced, and welcome to the Valley of the Sun.